Picture this. It's a quiet Tuesday in January. The markets are humming along, nothing crazy happening, and then, boom, the floor just drops out. What looked like a totally normal day suddenly turned into a full-blown financial firestorm. And it all kicked off with a demand so weird, so out there, it had to be a joke, right? Well, let's break down how this one bizarre gambit sent shockwaves through the entire global economy.
So, January 20th, 2026. A sea of red just washes over the European markets. We're talking the Euro Stoxx 50. That's the big one for the Eurozone, plunging almost 1.8%. France's CAC 40 got hit even harder, and Germany's DAX was right there with them. This wasn't some slow drip. It was a sudden, violent jolt to the system. And you can bet traders everywhere were scrambling, asking themselves, what on earth is going on?
And to give you a sense of just how big a deal this was, the wider Stoxx 600 index had its worst day in 3 months. Now, a 1.28% drop might not sound like the end of the world, but coming after a long period of calm, a drop this sharp, this fast, it screams one thing to traders: panic. Pure and simple.
But here's the crazy part. This wasn't your usual market scare. It wasn't bad corporate earnings or some spooky inflation report. Nope. The trigger for this massive sell-off came from way, way out of left field, from the world of high-stakes, knockdown, drag-out geopolitics. So what was it?
The culprit was an ultimatum from the United States, demanding to buy Greenland. Yeah, you heard me right. Not a trade deal, not a friendly chat, a flat-out demand for a massive piece of territory, and it was backed up by a huge economic threat. And believe me, the story of how we got to this point is even stranger than it sounds.
So this whole wild idea actually started years ago, back in 2019. The idea of the US buying Greenland was floated, and Denmark basically laughed it off, calling it absurd. Fast forward to January 2026, and suddenly nobody was laughing anymore. The offer was back on the table, but this time it wasn't a proposal. It was a formal ultimatum with a hard deadline, February 1st, or else.
And the terms were, wow. Just wow. The demand was for the complete and total purchase of Greenland. And the threat for not complying? A 10% tariff on 8 key NATO allies. We're talking heavy hitters like Germany and France. And just to twist the knife, there was an escalator clause. If you don't make a deal by June, those tariffs jump to a crippling 25%.
Okay, so when you have a threat that's that specific, the market's reaction is going to be just as specific. Investors didn't even hesitate. They immediately went after Europe's crown jewels, the things they're famous for selling to the world: fancy cars and luxury goods.
I mean, just look at the absolute carnage in the German auto sector. It was like a head-on collision with a wall of tariffs. Mercedes-Benz got slammed, down almost 7%, Volkswagen over 5%. You got to understand, these are global giants, but their whole business model is built on shipping high-end cars to the US. That model was now directly in the crosshairs.
But this wasn't just some broad, sweeping attack. Oh no. For France, it got personal. After President Macron apparently snubbed a US official, a new threat was added. One that was laser-focused, a mind-blowing 200% tariff on all French wine and champagne. This wasn't just a trade tactic. It was an economic declaration of war on a French national icon.
And you could see the ripple effect immediately. LVMH, the titan that owns brands like Moet and Dom Perignon, dropped nearly 4%. Remy Cointreau, the famous cognac maker, took a hit as it stared down the barrel of its prices tripling overnight in the US, its biggest market. In the blink of an eye, the entire French luxury industry was under siege.
But, in every crisis, some people see opportunity. While most of the market was bleeding out, investors were frantically searching for two things: safe places to park their cash and ways to actually profit from all this chaos. And two sectors immediately popped up on their radar. All of a sudden, defense stocks were the hottest ticket in town. Sweden's Saab, which just happens to make fighter jets perfect for patrolling the Arctic, up over 4%. Germany's Rheinmetall, a huge ammo supplier, up nearly 3%. The logic here was dead simple. If allies are starting to threaten each other, countries are going to start spending a whole lot more on weapons to defend themselves. And then there's Old Faithful, gold. In times of crazy uncertainty, investors do what they've always done. They run for safety. And gold is the ultimate financial safe house. It jumped 1.7% in just one day as money poured out of stocks and into the perceived safety of a lump of shiny metal. Which brings us to the billion-dollar question: why? Why on earth Greenland? Why risk a massive trade war with your closest allies over a giant island covered in ice? Well, the answer seems to be this weird cocktail of two things: cold, hard strategic logic and a surprisingly personal grudge.
First, let's talk strategy. Greenland isn't just ice and snow. Underneath all that, there's a treasure trove of an estimated 1.5 million tons of rare earth minerals. That's the stuff you need for everything from your smartphone to missile guidance systems. Plus, it's a massively important military position, kind of like an unsinkable aircraft carrier in the North Atlantic, perfect for watching what Russia and China are up to in the Arctic.
So yeah, there is a cold geopolitical logic to this whole thing. But that logic was almost completely blown out of the water by another motive, one that was far more unpredictable, one that no market analyst could ever build a model for.
And here it is, the quote that defied every economic model. In a text to Nordic leaders, the US president straight up linked this aggressive push for Greenland to his anger over not getting the Nobel Peace Prize. This one message turned a geopolitical chess match into something deeply personal, volatile, and totally unpredictable. And that right there is what absolutely terrified investors.
So, with all the pieces on the board, we've reached the endgame. What happens now? Where does this high-stakes standoff go from here? And what in the world does it mean for the rest of us?
On one side of the table, you've got the US using these massive tariffs to try and force a land deal. But Europe isn't helpless. They have a powerful weapon of their own, called the anti-coercion instrument. Think of it as the EU's big red button for economic warfare. Hitting that button could open the door to counter tariffs on up to 93 billion euros of American stuff. We're talking a full-blown transatlantic trade war.
So as the experts see it, this probably goes one of three ways. Scenario 1, escalation. The tariffs go up, Europe hits back, and the markets take another nosedive. Scenario 2, negotiation. This whole thing is just a crazy bargaining tactic, a deal gets made behind closed doors, and the markets breathe a huge sigh of relief. Or, Scenario 3, the nightmare option, a structural rupture. Some miscalculation leads to a military crisis, and that could trigger a systemic global crash.
And all of this leaves us with one final, massive question. This crisis has split the market neatly in two. On one side, you have the engines of progress and luxury, the cars, the champagne. On the other, you have the tools of fear and protection, the weapons and the gold. So in a world this unpredictable, where do you put your money? Do you bet on progress or do you bet on protection?